Okay, I don't talk about this much, but I did write a book, Mudfossils and Velikovsky and Minds in Collision. He wrote a book called Worlds in Collision. And wait till you see what they did to him. Same thing they did to me. Same thing they do to everybody that talks about truth. Now, before we get into Velikovsky's interview, I just want to tell you right now that everything is backwards now. They said originally there was a demarcation problem. He was pseudoscience, Velikovsky. He didn't have all the evidence they had. Well, he had all the evidence. They had none of the evidence, but they refused to watch and look at his evidence. He was presenting it. They refused. And they forced him to take his books off the shelves. Where do you see what they did to him? Absolutely disgraceful. Now, and they continue to do this to this day. And that is going to change today. Now, this is, I don't know what that is. It's some Jewish station, apparently, Yiddish or whatever they call it. It's only got 196 subscribers. And this is about Velikovsky. It goes back to 1964. Camera 3 it's called, and they're interviewing Velikovsky. Now I'm going to let this play in its entirety, and anybody that comes to Mudfossil University is required to view this. This is important because you will understand the predisposition of everyone that is in power. They hold the power over the people that are under them. And this is in every job, every academia, people that are writing books, people that are giving tours. They don't want to confront or be confronted. Once they hold sway and power, they want to maintain that. And the peer review system is a way to protect each other from criticisms of reality. Now, and this is what happened to Velikovsky, and it's happened to me, and it's happened to everybody since forever. Since about 300 years ago, since the Great Enlightenment. They called this the age of reasoning, where we can reason through everything. No, they can't. They find a way to skirt through everything. Now, they can no longer do that with the evidence that I presented. Mud fossils it's not deniable. So, at this point, it's, you could look at it a lot of different ways, but I look at it, as a failure to do their fiduciary duty to the students. Anyway, and that's been going on forever. So here goes.
Years ago, in 1950, an amazingly unconventional thinker astounded the scientific community with a theory that challenged many of its most deeply rooted assumptions. In a persuasive bestseller, this man presented a radical view of world history that linked research and hypotheses in such diverse disciplines as astronomy, geology, comparative religion, and archaeology. A storm of protest arose from every corner of his academic.
Now, not only did he have all of that stuff, and I reviewed all of his research. Years and years and years ago, I fully understood what he was doing, and I was appalled at what happened to him, and that really set me off probably to become the way I am. Now, just listen to this. It's really disturbing, to be perfectly honest.
Academic world, claiming that the theory was totally wrong. This opposition soon turned into an attempt to suppress the book and discredit the man who wrote it. The man is Immanuel Velikovsky, Russian-born doctor and psychoanalyst, student of the sciences and humanities, founder and one-time editor of the Scripta Universitatis series, out of which grew the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. For the last 25 years, Dr. Velikovsky has been resident in the United States, where he has continued his studies and advanced his theories. His first book was titled...
Now, I just want to mention to you, he knew Einstein. Velikovsky was not like an unknown somebody in the woods like me. He was in the scientific community, and they still destroyed him. Me, they just ignore.
Worlds in Collision. And that was followed by Ages in Chaos, Earth in Upheaval, and Oedipus and Akhenaten. Dr. Velikovsky's contention is that in the memory of man, the Earth has gone through great natural paroxysms. He's founded his theory on the ancient records of man from all over the world, on archaeological evidence in the form of ancient calendars that have become strangely obsolete, and on new and radical interpretations of information from astronomy, paleontology, paleomagnetism, and evolution. In addition, Dr. Velikovsky's theory has led him to re-examine prevailing views regarding the origins of religion, as well as those which form the basis of celestial mechanics.
Now, I don't think Velikovsky had access to the information that Sitchin brought out with the Sumerian text, because that led a whole new layer into the ancient tales and the Hebrew cosmology. Now, I believe he must have known about the Hebrew cosmology, about the seven heavens and all that business, because that was all written about too. And the earth has been recreated 7 times, and it goes through these make and break cycles.
And he also calls for a realignment of the chronologies of ancient civilizations. Well, the result of this wide-sweeping theory, as I've said, was a flood of very harsh criticism and ridicule. The scientific community was almost unanimous in rejection of his work. Jacques Barzun, Dean of Graduate Faculties at Columbia University, wrote just recently that the merits of the scientific issue do not alter the deplorable treatment Dr. Velikovsky's ideas received from the profession. The prejudging scorn and closing of ranks against the heretic showed typical guild animus. In recent years, however, evidence collected during the geophysical year and by several space probes has tended to verify several of Velikovsky's predictions.
Virtually all of his predictions were verified. Okay, I'm going to just try to shut up, which I have a very difficult time doing. So I'm going to let this play out. Here goes.
For instance, he had said in the face of strong disagreement that because of her recent birth, Venus is extremely hot, a view subsequently borne out by observations of Mariner 2. He was accused of inventing an interplanetary magnetic field, but one has been detected since then by Pioneer 5. He claimed in 1950 that the ancient civilizations of Central America were much older than believed. Recently, this view, too, has been proved by radiocarbon dating. All in all, a score of Dr. Velikovsky's predictions have been verified, and the opposition within the scientific community has abated. New voices are being heard. For instance, that of Lloyd Mox, professor of astronomy at Columbia University, who, while he still disagrees with Velikovsky, says his predictions should be recognized and his writings should be carefully studied and analyzed because they are the product of an extraordinary and brilliant mind and are based on some of the most concentrated and penetrating scholarship and research of our period. Here with us today on Camera 3 to discuss his theories with Dr. Velikovsky in his first television appearance is Eric Larrabee, an editor and writer whose articles about Dr. Velikovsky were the earliest attempts to make him familiar to a wider audience, and whose latest piece in Harper's Magazine has directed attention to a re-examination of the Velikovsky theories.
Dr. Velikovsky, it's almost 15 years now since you first published Worlds in Collision, and in the years since you've published 3 other books, Volume 1 of Ages and Chaos, Earth in Upheaval, Oedipus and Akhenaton. And during this period there has been the curious paradox that although the scientific academic community hasn't by any means accepted what you have to say, that fortune has smiled on you in many respects, in the sense that science itself, point by point, has gone somewhat more in your direction. And also recently that one observes the phenomenon of the younger generation in the colleges and universities being more receptive to new ideas than the older. I was reminded of a quote of Max Planck's, which you know as well, that new ideas in science don't actually become accepted. What happens is that the proponents of the older ideas die off and are replaced. When you look at some of the things that have happened, some of the ways in which science has come your way, so to speak, and this much larger interest, much greater willingness to talk about your ideas in the colleges, how do you feel looking back on it? Which of the developments jump out to you the most? I remember you saying once that you had never dreamed when you first were thinking what you should write about the planet Venus, that in your lifetime you would see something like the space probe Mariner, which successfully went within 20,000 miles of that faraway planet.
Just think if you could see the giant dragon and the giant fish in the desert in Morocco.
I know that stands out to you as one of the events of this time. What in particular led you to be so concerned with what Mariner would find on Venus, with in particular the question of Venus's heat? If I may
Well,
say
you
so.
know, Mr. Larby, that Venus is persona dramatis of my first book. In that book, I claim that there were terrestrial catastrophes caused by extraterrestrial agents in prehistoric and also historical times. And I tried to identify the agent. Well, Venus, the story of Venus as a protoplanet, occupies large part of the book. However, in the beginning of the book, for about 150 pages, I describe the events that were observed and left memory of them in so many historical and also folkloristic documents of all civilization of the world.
Records.
Yes, and records. Now you understand well that I had no personal means to send a Mariner probe. And so my hope and my prayer was that I should still have the chance in my lifetime, not only myself, but my opponents, I wish them long life, that they should be also witnesses of that probe, which now 2 years ago, I believe it was August of 1962, was launched, and by December 14, I think it was 14,
Passed by
the date point.
Well, if I may be a devil's advocate just momentarily, I know what many of your critics have said is that a prediction like this is a matter of chance, and that they imply that you are pulling things out of the air. Well, obviously, you could have said a great many other things about Venus. You could have said Venus has 2 moons or is made out of cottage cheese or something other than saying that it is hot. What led you in particular to say, quite contrary to the belief of the time, that Venus was a hot planet?
Well, first I will say what I said. At the end of my book, in the very last 2 sections, before the section, the end, I put 2 claims. So the position which I selected for them in my book by itself proves the importance I gave to them. These were, first, Venus must be very hot.
Must be hot.
Must be very hot, is very hot. I called the chapter Thermal Balance of Venus. And I said, Venus gives off heat. Not as usually supposed to be a planet gets so much heat from the sun and reflects so much heat in the space. It gives its own heat. Of course, if it is a body like other bodies in the solar system of 6 billion years or longer, older, of course, then you wouldn't expect that it would give still give.
All right, I just want to say something about Velikovsky. Now, I appreciate everything he does, and I very rarely have any opposition to what he says. Now, he is saying Venus was born 3,500 years ago, and I agree with that because that's what he discovered in the text. Now, Venus also, he says, is extremely hot, and we know that is a fact. It's hotter than even he thought it was. Now, he's talking about it being a young planet, and therefore it has to cool down. And I'm sure that's probably a high degree of the heat. However, it is also spinning backwards. Now, the right-hand rule it throws off energy. The left-hand spin gathers energy, and I can show that with my light research, and I have. And that backwards particle, it turns really hot. I'll show it right now. No, I'm sure you've seen this with accelerated light. That's regular pulse red laser. That's obviously accelerating. That's obviously a particle. And when you get real close in here, you can see that the black and the white, which is this right down here, is the particle. All right, and that is in a box shape just prior to hitting the venturi, which is right here. So here it's the particle, it's in the box. Here it's the black separates from the white. The black particles roll all around the outside, and the white is 100% white in the middle. Nothing else. Now, here's what I was just talking about, how a gathering field and then a splaying field. These are splaying fields. These are the normal electron showers you expect. Now, this though created one particle that was not like the others. Let's look at that. All right, you saw the light accelerating, coming towards us. That's coming out of the venturi. And as the white particles that we saw start to concuss in the atmosphere, which is loaded with particles, they create these Higgs fields, which is nothing more than particles being excited that are in the air by the particles spinning through the air, which is the light. This one is spinning backwards. That is a whole different issue than the rest of them. So in other words, these are spinning right-hand spin. This one is spinning to the left, you can see, and it's gathering its field. And then it created a particle that appears to be a transitional particle between the regular Higgs field and this. And it creates what I call a light trumpet. And I'll show you that in a second. Now, the other thing I want to show you is that we can not only redshift and slow down light, we can blue shift and speed it up. That's a blue shifter, and I can show this in very, very good detail. And it's because it's being crushed on both sides by fields, forcing it to pop like a champagne cork. These were all red. That should not be purple or blue. That's light acceleration. So not only have I showed light accelerating from the red laser into the venturi, I'm also showing the electron neutrinos themselves accelerating, because that's not a regular light particle. This is the electron neutrino shower until it hits and reattaches itself to the muon neutrino, and then it becomes what you would consider an electron in my world. All right, these all came through the venturi up here as red particles. And again, these are the fermion portion, the strong portion of the dipole, and the black dot, which is the muon weak portion, just floats around. However, this one here is being crushed both sides by particles. You see, this one's pushing on that one, it's pushing on this one, this is pushing on that one, it's pushing on this one. This one here is being accelerated and turning blue, and then it's dropping right back down to its red state. But at this point, it's shot out like a cork right out of the midst of everything. Now, again, Rod, absolutely fabulous work. Now, you really got to study thin film photography, because I'm sure that that's what they're using on these lenses to capture this. Thin film gives us the ability to see particles that are, we can see them as pieces of particles. Very, very cool stuff. And we're going to go through all that working with actual bubbles of water. And you could do this with your own phone. This is nothing more than a cell phone. There's nothing more than a cell phone able to capture these pictures of light. I know you go, oh, Roger, that's impossible. No, it is not. And it is because of thin film photography, thin film layers that separate out frequencies. And in light, in water bubbles with oils in them, absolutely fascinating. And when I say it's fascinating, it's because when that water bubble hangs and you hold it like this, the top is very thin and it gets thicker and thicker and thicker, and the bottom you have like a water drop. And the change in the light frequencies that you see, it's absolutely amazing. We'll go through that, but we're going to have a lot of fun understanding things. And you're going to see that what we were told, it really does not hold water. It doesn't hold light even. The way you want to start to think is anytime you see light and a glow, that means something is pushing against something else. Now, it's pushing against the atmosphere here, which is loaded with particles. So you see a glow here. It's not glowing way back there as much because this is the impact zone. Same thing with here, same thing with here, coming this way. Now, what is this? That is that backwards particle spinning. I believe this is the one. I'm not 100% certain of that. There's so much research needs to be done, but I believe it is, and I can see there is some form of a pattern here. And I can see, I believe, it's the impacting of this anti-particle or reverse spinner or whatever it is that hits this normal field that's being generated by the spinning particle, and then it does this. Now that appears to be expanding, and if this is a lot of energy right here. You see, anything again? Think of this anytime you see something glowing more than the things around it. It's energetic. That's energetic. So why is it energetic? It's coming through this way, slamming into what we can't see, which are the particles, but they're glowing. They're starting to glow. And then you see they're starting to actually excite these little particles. And in a lot of the other shots, they're just like a universe of stars because they are concussing going through this, and you can see them all lighten up. So this is a very interesting particle. This is stunning stuff. To me, it's stunning. I would like to see some interest in it. And you can do this at home. I'm going to show you how to do this yourself. And you can actually tune these venturis. And you can actually use different materials to create the venturi. Because that's going to have an impact. Everything, and I'll explain the whole thing about, well, here it is right here. But I will explain it in extreme detail because this is, I'd like to get right to the meat and potatoes. And that is the meat, and I even forgot about the potatoes. All you got to do is send a red laser through two drums that create a venturi, and that is what they call a venturi, and then the light will stack up there. It'll accelerate, it'll pull the actual particle from the ball that it's inside of. It controls a huge region around it. You can't see it. It's nothing. It's just like the air right here. But that particle within there has a sphere of that influence. When it comes through the air, it creates these waves in front of it because we're pulsing. Pulse, 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 pulse. This is just a construction laser. Here it is right here. It's pop, 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 and it's shooting these pulses, and they're banging into the air in front of it, and all of those particles are glowing, and then all of a sudden it has to speed up to get through this venturi. That's the nature of a nozzle. It's a venturi, it's a hose, a tip of a hose, however you want to determine it. But it's a restriction that forces everything to crush into each other's regions. At that point, the glowy particle, which is this piece, remember now, coming through, I hope you've seen this a few times because I've shown it many times. Coming out of that laser is this. But this is not, this is the particle. And that's exactly what it looks like right here. Because I can show you the particle, and I probably already have. And that particle is this. But not is it that, it owns a region like this huge around it. It's just like a gigantic ball around here. Because that's the magnetic zone of influence. Look up hydrogen 21 centimeter line. Hydrogen controls 21 centimeters around it. It'll flip electrons and flip them upside down, 21 centimeters away. That's an absolutely enormous sphere of influence, which is what these are. Boom, 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 boom. These are less of that sphere of influence, I believe, because hydrogen itself is 1,838 electrons, something like that. This is just 4 of them. So as it's coming through, it's still displacing a whole batch of particles, creating waves. And then it takes off to go through here. When it does, the energetic part, which is the white, or I'm showing as red, separates from the black. And it ends up looking just like this. A real glowy one, and then just a black one just walks away. And that leads to this which is electron flood theory, which says that the entire nucleus, they're trying to break nucleuses at Large Hadron Collider, thinking that there's difference in the nucleus than everything else, and then they're getting down to the particles that we display, and they're finding them, but they think it's just that's only part of a nucleus. No, everything's made of these same particles, and I show this, and I'm going to show you that they are now admitting it, and they're admitting it because of the bosons that we have discovered, Rod and I, and I'll show you the boson. All right, don't forget now, there's the Venturi where everything goes into chaos. Well, originally back out here, there was no definition whatsoever to the light particles. They were just sort of glowy little things in the air. Well, as they approach the Venturi, they compact and they start to show their actual formation, which is up and back to back dipoles. And then they literally explode, and the black ball walks away from the white ball, and the white ball explodes, as you can see over here, but the blacks just walk out of there. All right, I'm going to show you a couple of articles, and this is what they're talking about right here, is these bosons. They are walking away from the particle they were attached to. These are called muons. Yeah, these are the muons, the black balls. They have no energy. They just come through as a single cone, which they can see, and then the white ones come through as an electron shower. And they are the smallest of the particles. And they're finding these at a Large Hadron Collider, and they have discovered that these don't always equal these, is what they're saying. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you one thing that's true, is when they go through this Venturi, the white ones are a strong force, and they just cannot stand being next to each other, and they just explode like an atomic bomb. That's the energy. You can see the black ones. They'll lay right on top of each other. And that's exactly what they say for the carrier force, the bosons. So you have fermion, is white, explosive, strong force. You have black balls, which is the boson, the weak force, and now they also call them muon neutrinos, which is the black balls, and these are electron neutrino showers. Let's take a look at that. Now, these are the green electrons. They do the exact same thing, only they start to concuss quite a ways further out. I believe they're coming this direction here, being sucked into the Venturi, into the explosive area here where they become chaotic. Now, and they start to display, and then they become like that red blurry stuff, only they are much more energetic. And I have one showing red at the top and green at the bottom going through the same slit at the same time, and you see the array afterwards very distinct, the red very short, the green very distant, but in the mean between the two of them, the interaction above and below, because they're fairly close to each other, it's very, very stunning to see. I'm not going to show it now. I don't want to show all my cards till the end here, because there's a lot to see, and I want you guys to do your own research. This isn't a cell phone. And you know, as I showed, that's all this is right here. This is it. This is all you have to do at home. And you could do this, most people have some kind of laser laying around, or maybe you can borrow one from your friend or something, and you shoot, but be careful with your eyes. Very, very careful. I have glasses. I don't really do this much. Rod's the one doing it. But you should have something, and you have to have the right kind of glasses. They have to, for the different type of lasers you have. And I'm telling you, you can really damage your eyes just like that. Now, these Rod used literally nails, as I understand it. Oh, I know he did. And he only used 2 nails together, and he made the laser go through that slit. Now, the size of the nails, the diameter of them, is going to determine how much of a curve there is. Plus, the materials they're made out of is also going to determine the impact of the light on that, like if it was wood, or if it was a sponge, or if it was metal, or if it was different types of metals. They're going to interact differently. Now, how is that going to work? I don't know. I'd like to see, what would happen on the outcome if it was wood versus steel versus copper versus brass, gold, whatever. Who knows? Now, the other thing you can do with this is you can open and close the venturi. The tighter the venturi, the squirtier the squirt. Just like if you have a hose and you open it up and it's sort of dribbling out, and then you tighten it up a little bit, which means you restrict the venturi, it goes flying out of there because it's being forced. It's being crushed. It's being forced. So the acceleration goes this way, and in this case, the non-concussive charge, which is the boson, just walks away from it. And I can tell you what, I can see that in soap bubble experiments too. It's absolutely amazing what I can see in soap bubbles now, using oils and so forth. There's so much to see at this. This is just really, really, really exciting, because this displays that I believe the black parts you're going to see floating around the edges of this, they must be the dark energy. And we can actually draw those away. We can draw these particles away from the black particles inside of soap bubbles and things. Very, very exciting. I can't wait to get started on that. But, all right, I suppose I got to calm down a little bit. Okay, here, I'm sorry I hadn't interrupted.
Of course, if it is a body like other bodies in the solar system of 6 billion years or longer, older, of course, then you wouldn't expect that it would give give off heat. Now, I said also that it was observed by contemporaries of those events, and
all right, when he talks about this, I don't know if I mentioned it before, I'm getting a little lost as I go through this, but Venus is spinning backwards. Instead of having the right hand spin like we all have, it has a backward spin, which is scrubbing really hard through the ether in space, which is loaded with atomic particles. They're just loaded around everything. And that is scrubbing through, just like we're scrubbing through our ionosphere out, way out there, miles out, is thousands of degrees. Our Earth is, 100 or such. The sun is 6,000 on the surface, millions out where it scrubs, because it's such a big body scrubbing, and that's what creates all the magnetic electrical activities and all these loops of electric and all that. And the same thing with us, lightning, and it also creates a Schumann resonance. And I show exactly how that happens, and I can show that there are layers of resonant stability around the Earth. Look up the Tsar bomb and you will see them. They highlight it when the particles flow through it, and it's a horrifying bomb, but it explains what I am explaining. Now, here goes.
After, as an incandescent body. At the same time, still in 1959, it was calculated and accepted that the surface temperature of Venus is 17 degrees Celsius, only about 3 degrees above the temperature of the Earth.
It's very similar to Earth.
Now, even so-called ashen light, which is shimmering off some light from the shadowed side of Venus. Venus, between the Earth and the Sun, has, like moon, a shadowed side, was explained by a cover of ice. Well, of course, you understand that there could be no ice as a temperature in which lead is molten.
Yeah.
Before Mariner, already in 1961, it was found that by radio signals arriving from Venus that it is very hot, actually 600 Fahrenheit.
And your reason for believing this was that your theory required that it be a new planet, a young planet, in geological astronomical time.
Yes, it was the cause of the needle heat, but also the result of the short but very stormy history of this body.
Which is what you described in your book.
Which I described, actually not theorized as much as tried to reconstruct from ancient sources from so many civilizations.
Well, the reason that the objection that the scientific community has lavished on you, I assume, is that it is quite basic to a number of different sciences, that the life of the solar system has been uneventful, regular, in the terms in which we exactly as we see it now, for many, many hundreds of thousands of years.
Well, until very recently, this was the accepted view that the solar system is almost in a static state for, well, it was, when I started my book, it was said 2 billion. By now it is already 9 billion years. But recently, you know, it has become, it all changed. So many things were discovered, and one of them is the heat of Venus. And let me also say that 600 degree of 1959 was one of the reasons to send the Mariner probe to find that it is not so. I remember in December of that were year 62, when the Mariner probe was still on, just past the date point, but there was not yet the final report. I heard a man, scientist from Jet Propulsion Lab, who, speaking before the AAA convention in Philadelphia, made rather expressed his hope that it will be found the temperature much lower. What was found, it was still higher, not 600 but 800 degrees.
Well, there was another finding of Mariner, which has just in this past week been still further confirmed, which is the question of Venus's motion. The recent confirmation of the retrograde motion is even more puzzling, is it not, and even more embarrassing to the conventional orthodox view. Yes. I see it's not embarrassing to your point of view.
No, not at all. Not
you were more comfortable with it.
All right, this is the reverse spin. Okay, here goes.
Not at all. I would say that the Mariner probe surpassed all my wildest dreams. It found first, I would say, confirmed the find made before that by Pioneer 5, that the space, interplanetary space, is magnetic. Well, I was a target of much ridicule exactly because of this, that I invented forces that do not exist in the solar system, because I needed them to explain all these unusual events that took place in the sky.
First of all, the forces he's talking about is the ether, which they knew about long before Plato, and it's the only thing that can explain our ionosphere's temperature and the corona of the sun and all of the magnetic anomalies that you see happen due to the scrub of all these things through space. Simple as that.
Event that the Greek called Theomachy, the battle of the gods.
I remember you saying one time that one description of your work might be to replace René Descartes back in the position he deserves in 17th century science. I believe you meant by this his theory of the tourbillon and the vortices as opposed to a Newtonian universe.
Yes, at least to put him back into position of a rightful contender of Newtonian theory, because very recently, actually a year before my book was published, in a book of philosopher Butterfield, I saw the sentence, in that great debate or contest, Descartes was the loser, because these worlds, these vortices that he described, these particles of matter or of ether that fill the universe, they are not there. Nobody found them, nobody discovered them. So it was an empty universe in which the celestial bodies in complete peace and eventfully traveled for eons.
And the universe we see now is not that kind of place.
Not at all.
All right.
But
I
then
want to
get
go back to that.
exactly because of this that I invented for others that do not exist in
All
the
right,
solar
so-
system, because I needed.
Here we're talking about the ether, the particles in space, which is nothing more than light. It's the light that comes to us. I can't imagine how they don't think those particles exist. And it all falls back on Einstein and the earliest age of reason says, I don't see it, it's not there.
Them to explain all these unusual events that took place in the sky, events that the Greek called theomachy, the battle of the gods.
I remember you saying one time that one description of your work might be to replace René Descartes back in the position he deserves in 17th century science. I believe you meant by this his theory of the tourbillon and the vortices as opposed to a Newtonian universe.
Yes, at
of
least
empty
to put
space.
him back into position of a rightful contender of Newtonian theory, because very recently, actually a year before my book was published, in a book of philosopher Butterfield, I saw the sentence, in that great debate or contest, Descartes was a loser, because
Descartes was a loser because these worlds,
these worlds, these vortices that he described, these particles of matter or of ether that fill the universe, they are not there. Nobody found them, nobody discovered them. So it was an empty universe in which the celestial bodies in complete peace and eventfully traveled for eons.
And the universe we see now is not that kind of place.
Not at all.
it is not at all. And it is a problem because we are scrubbing through that particles that they say didn't exist. So we would just never heat up. Well, we're heating up because we're scrubbing through them. And the more we heat up, the more we scrub. And then the more we burn and make energy, which is to release the particles that are in these cores. All right, anytime you combust things, you break apart the cores of things and release energy. And the release of the energy just means that these particles now take up huge regions where before they were locked together in a piece of coal. When you burn the coal, you end up with nothing that hardly weighs anything. Well, that's because you sent all those particles off into space as heat. That's all they are. I showed this a million times. These particles that are free-floating in space, they're static electricity, they are attached to water molecules, they are heat. You pull them out, it gets colder. You push them in, it gets hotter. That's what happens here. I've shown it with the light experiments. Now let's continue on with my hero, Velikovsky.
But then again, Mariner found not only this, it found, of course, this heat. And there is no explanation for this heat. Would be after it was already found, there would be some explanation for it. The best it was done by Kuiper on assumptions that there is water vapors and carbon dioxide when it was thought 600. The best he could do with on this optimal condition for greenhouse effect would be 170 Fahrenheit. But now for 800 degrees, there is no explanation at all. Actually, I have to ask you whether you know any astronomer who has offered an explanation.
Yeah, the explanation I offer is it's spinning in reverse, which is scrubbing rather than complementary spinning. It's going backwards against the flow, basically.
Theory that was acceptable to the next astronomer.
I think part of their reaction, again, if I may be the devil's advocate, is that the astronomers, although they may not have explanations for the puzzles that you forcefully put to their attention, the astronomers object, at least many of them objected at the time, because they thought evidence was being brought to their field from, to their minds, extraneous fields such as history, archaeology, and the like. they have not been willing, at least in recent time, to accept that sort of evidence as binding on questions of astronomy. And I wonder sometimes when you think that your first book was the one largely given over to this question of the human record, what men said happened, and this involved a use of the past human material in an unusual, surprising way. What do you think would have happened if you had brought your other evidence first? If you had talked first about geology? If you had published Earth in Upheaval, which has a completely different kind of evidence in it? Do you think they would have been more receptive?
No, they wouldn't be. They're not receptive to anything that challenges the status quo.
I wouldn't know. Many people affirm this, that would have I started with geological and paleontological evidence, I would have probably not met the same stormy opposition. But, and I understand, of course, that for astronomer to change his basic views on what he believes are mythology, old wives' tales, biblical story. You know, the Bible is a book that we are asked to swear on it, but we are asked also not to believe into it. And at least, well, you know, of course, that I am not a fundamentalist and didn't try in any way to prove the Bible right. But on the other hand, it happened to me to go even further than fundamentalists go, because on the Bible, and actually in so many places, in Psalms, in Prophets, in Mosaic books, spoken about mountains that melt like wax, that the sea erupts, and other things, that the fundamentalists would believe that these are metaphors. But I found that the same sentence, the same description are plentifully available in Mexican, in Chinese, in
yes,
Hindu,
exactly,
in all
exactly.
that. And I didn't give any preference to the Bible.
Exactly. I think this may have been one of the elements that confused the argument these 14, 15 years ago. The fact that it sounded like a fundamentalist argument, the fact that they didn't notice that you were drawing also on evidence from peoples all over the earth, from the ancient legends and records of all peoples, and the fact also that
you could not have been not noticed by those who read the book.
Well, I sometimes wonder, and I'm not. When you see some of the things that have been said about the book, you are sometimes led to doubt that they should have been
some of my
careful.
objectors who thought that they can gain by this the sympathy of religious people accuse me that I gave the same valence to biblical description as to some mythology or some legend, folklore of primitive peoples or peoples in pagan religions.
Well, there is another point involved here, which is that when the argument over catastrophism went on in the 19th century, there were still many people who took a catastrophist or semi-catastrophist kind of view, who did so for a mixture of theological reasons and bound themselves to the theology of that time. So that the idea has often been associated with a sort of semi-fundamentalist point of view. And the fact that you come to stories which appear to be, in quotes, miraculous, and offer not a miraculous explanation, but a natural scientific explanation, is not quite easily assimilated by readers who have always put it in the other context.
Well, don't forget also that by now it's 100 years since Darwin achieved his victory over the book of Genesis. Now it is a little bit difficult to go back and to say, well, the story is not exactly so. We have the phenomena from all places, from the bottom of the sea with ash and with nickel, which is of meteoric origin, and the ash that covers all the bottom of the ocean. And you know, geologists today claim, like Professor Ewing.
I would love to have him be able to see mud fossils. I would be in seventh heaven, so to speak.
Of Columbia University, that it was an encounter with a terrific comet that spread this ash all over the world, and now it's found evenly spread on the bottom of the oceans. And you have now the accepted view, which was not accepted only 10 or 5 years ago, that the terrestrial axis moved, that paleomagnetism proves that terrestrial axis, that magnetic axis, and possibly, like Runcan and other of Manchester, claim that the Earth turned over. We know now from observation of Professor Danjon, director of Paris Observatory, that flares on the sun may influence the speed of rotation of the Earth, and there were sudden changes. Only very recently we read even that Jupiter was subjected to strong changes, and this also confirmed one of the latest of my
points you had made.
Yeah.
Isn't it strikingly true that the scientists who are willing to talk about these disturbances, about a change in the terrestrial axis, a change in the magnetic field of the Earth, that they are willing to talk about them provided they are put very far back in history? They are willing to talk about distortion of the Earth's crust, provided
well, this is a psychological problem. You see, we generally don't like to know that we are traveling on a accident-prone planet. You of course understand that I am not a prophet of doom, just the other way around. I believe that we are now, if the man himself will not be the cause of his destruction, we are now in a settled solar system for eons to come. But in the past, there were, in human memory, these very events that by...
See, I think he should have understood that we were on the road to where we are now back then, because he just made a statement. And you know, people try to stay as close to being able to be heard as they can. And I say, he said
very
this.
far back in history. They're willing to talk about distortion of the Earth's crust, provided...
Well, this is a psychological problem. You see, we generally don't like to know that we are traveling on a accident-prone planet. You of course understand that I am not a prophet of doom, just the other way around. I believe that we are now, if the man himself will not be the cause of his destruction, we are now in a settled...
All right, he's talking about man ourselves being the cause of our destruction. If not, we are in a fairly settled state. Well, again, every time energy is burnt and so forth, you add to the atmosphere and the concussion of everything that goes through. They call it, you know, greenhouse gases. Well, they're greenhouse gases, but they're only, it's not because of carbon dioxide, it's because when they're liberated from their chunk of coal or whatever it is, they fill up space. And fill up space just as heat. That's all it is. You're putting free electrons into space. As you combust things, they spit out free electrons.
Solar system for eons to come. But in the past, there were, in human memory, these very events that, by reconstruction of which, I could put all those claims, what you call predictions, that now, like Professor Barton, Professor Morse, and others writing to Science and others claim for me these predictions, an unusual prediction, because it was not things that could be accepted, could be put into accepted scheme. Venus is hot. When it's calculated, only 17, and it's 100 degrees hot. What? Venus is covered by hydrocarbons. You know, 4 years before the publication of my...
Hydrocarbons is blood. All right, it's your carbon. The carbon is in your blood. It's literally saturated with carbon. Hydro is nothing more than like watery bits, hydrogen.
I approached the director of Harvard College Observatory asking that spectral analysis should be performed on Venus, and he directed me to Professor Adams, director of Mount Wilson Observatory in California, in Palomar, and to Professor Wild, still alive, at Yale, and I placed before them, put before them, this my request. Explain that this is a crucial test. And understand, please, Venus is the last link in the theory. If there were catastrophes, and in historical times, and caused by extraterrestrial agent, and the agent was a protoplanet, Venus, and now I can say what Venus is like, that it is hot, that it is wrapped in a envelope of hydrocarbons. This I claimed
on the basis of the historical record.
Yes. And I asked this to be performed, and I got the answers. This was summer 46, 4 years before the publication of the book. There are no hydrocarbons on Venus, in writing. And I was so firm in my belief that I did not blunder in the interpretation of historical sources that I put in my book. There must be an envelope of hydrocarbons. And then when in February 63, 2 months after the Mariner passing point, yes, then the report was given out, and it was hydrocarbons, dust and gases, exactly as I claimed it.
The embarrassment here for science is that you are seeking to unearth a natural fact by way of the humanistic evidence, which is to say you're bringing together a synthesis of different kinds of knowledge.
But let me say
is an argument.
Let me ask you, what is the principle of uniformity? What does he say? Principle of uniformity on which is based the theory of evolution of Darwin. Our modern scientific thought is built on principle of uniformity, which crumbles by today. And what does it mean, this principle? Does it mean really that things that we do not observe today could not have happened years ago? What does it mean today? Today is this day in August?
But if you believe
it is not. If we don't see today a comet, do not exist comets. If we do not see since decades with an added eye that any nova, there are no novas.
That's exactly.
So where should
Camera 3 has appeared today at the endless fascination of the universe, and for permitting us to listen to their conversation on its challenge to the mind of man. Our thanks to Dr. Emmanuel Velikovsky and Mr. Eric Larrett. Until next week, this is Jim McAndrew. Goodbye for Camera 3.
Fascinating. We're going to dig a little deeper. Okay, I'm going to just play a little bit of this from Thunderbolt's project. They do great work. Now, this is from April 2019. It's Irving Wolfe, and this is about Velikovsky, and that's why I'm playing it. And it's a really good presentation. All this guy is doing is talking. Nothing else, but listen to what he has to say. And he's going to talk about how Velikovsky was treated and so forth. Here goes. Now, and let me just make one more statement. Velikovsky is, you would consider him a religious guy. He was an ancient religious scholar. So he's going to have an eyeball to that side as well as an eyeball to the scientific side. Now, I came at my work a little differently. I came at my work quite by accident. I was not a religious person at all, and when I discovered what I discovered, I had to start to think. I'm a thinker, that's all. And if you think, you're going to think. And if you see what I found, and the messages that I received finding what I found, and then you don't look to what you would consider the religious aspect of it, or the supernatural, or the mythological, or the biblical, then you're just not thinking. And that's just, I don't do that, I think. So listen to what he has to say. And this was Velikovsky made some statement about the Bible, because he's trying to relate everything in the Bible to these upheavals and an interaction by a planetary body forcing the Earth to stop its rotation or something like that. Because Velikovsky tried to explain everything just exactly the way I do in a scientific manner, and I do it with energy, and I do it atomically. and I do it with the electron flood theory, and it works for every single thing that I have seen so far. As far as the sun standing still, that I find a little hard to understand, but I do now know that there are things that we have never ever considered, like the dragon and the fish in the desert. So this, there's supernatural things, because that's as close to supernatural as you're going to get in my world. Here goes.
This phrase, the day the sun stood still. And the next day it was a sensation across America. Here is a scientist who can explain the miracles in the Bible scientifically, and he explained how the sun stood still. So this was picked up all over the country. And it was picked up by mainstream big science in America. And it was picked up in particular by an astronomer called Harlow Shapley. And the whole Velikovsky story for the first 10 years is really a battle between Velikovsky and Shapley. Shapley was the head of the Department of Astronomy at Harvard. He was also in charge of the Harvard College Observatory. He was the Dean of American Astronomers, and he went ballistic when he read about this. Now, normally, if someone comes up with what you call a crackpot theory, that the world was populated by little green men, most of
them are going to ignore it. It's exactly what he's going to say, and that is true, and that's what's happened to me. But I have not only been ignored, I've been silenced, because it's not a crackpot theory. I have all of the evidence to support it, but it so overthrows them that I have been locked in a room, sitting here looking at a wall by myself.
mainstream science will just ignore it. But in this case, mainstream science attacked Velikovsky.
They had to attack him because they knew he was right, and they knew he was going to be heard. They know I'm right, but I'm never going to be heard. Nobody's passing this along. Now, I don't know whether people don't pass it along because they're afraid to be ridiculed, or they're just not hearing it. I have no idea, but it's not getting out in the way it should. And I'm hearing all kinds of crazy stories that are, hundreds of thousands of hits, millions of hits, and I'm coming out with actual factual evidence and historical documentation, all of the things that are real research, and it's just ignored. Very difficult.
With all guns firing before the book had even been published. Shapley organized a whole campaign. He had his disciples, who were also members of the Harvard astronomical community. He had them write articles. They photocopied the articles and sent them out all across the country. They asked individuals in different departments write letters attacking Velikovsky. They tried to block the publication of the book by Macmillan, and this went on months before the book was published. At the very last moment, the publisher of this is the Velikovsky affair. You have to understand that there was a Velikovsky affair. It's very important that you understand why it happened and what it means in the long term for how you view modern science. There was an enormous campaign of name-calling. Velikovsky was called a crank. He was called a crackpot. He was called a pseudoscientist. He was called a fraud. And mainly this was all carried out by Harlow Shapley himself, who protested that he never did anything. He never wrote letters to anybody, but all these letters are extant. And they tried to block the publication of Worlds in Collision as if it's some kind of poison. And you cannot allow it to infect people's minds. Well, at the very last second, the publisher at Macmillan had to call in 4 more scientists to read Velikovsky's book to decide if it should be published. They all agreed that it should. The book was published. It became an instantaneous bestseller. And this was the man who could prove why the sun stood still. A very unfortunate bit of history. Now, within about 6 months, Macmillan was blackmailed, literally, by professors all over America who said, if you continue to publish Velikovsky, we will not order your textbooks at our universities. And you have to understand, if you have a very large university like Ohio State, and you have a couple of thousand kids in first year, and they're all taking astronomy, and they're all going to order Macmillan texts, this involved a lot of money. So Macmillan unwillingly had to give up the book when it was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And they transferred it.
12 weeks in a row it was on the bestseller list. And it's nothing has changed. The entire education system, as far as I can determine, is nothing more than a money mill, and it's designed to put the less fortunate, and specifically the ones that can't afford the extortion, to pay for that piece of paper. It forces them into servitude because they're never going to get to that level of acceptance, and all it is right now is acceptance. And now it's completely changed. The pseudoscience is on the science side now because they don't accept anything that's real. I have the DNA, I have the CAT scans, I have the specimens. They're giant human beings. There's a gigantic dragon and a gigantic fish in the desert in Morocco, and you can go and look at it right now yourself on Google Earth. There are things that they never ever 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 considered that are 100% factual, that we have the supporting evidence for. And additionally, we accelerated light and show the particles and everything. And light is just nothing more than the tiniest bits of particles. And what CERN did, they took the biggest bits, smashed them together, and then looked for the tiniest bits. We took the tiniest bits, forced them to crush each other, and then we looked for what they did to each other, and they created what they wanted. It was the Higgs bosons, or the bosons and the fermions and the muons and the electron neutrinos and all that stuff. We got it all. We just started with the smallest particle first. I think that was a little more intelligent. So it's time to consider that these scientists, just like they did to Velikovsky, are doing it today to anybody that presents like I do. I have CAT scans, I have DNA, I have specimens, I have an anatomist, I have the chemistry, I have the microscopy. We have active sites that we are digging these things up from. It is all related back to our earliest stories of giants in the earth in those days. And they are literally giants. The earth is giants. And then if you go back to, this guy is now going to get into the religious stuff, which Velikovsky got into, which killed him, because they hate that because it destroys Darwin. I mean, it destroys everything, because the religious stuff is true. It said there were giants in the earth in those days. And then there's a Gospel of Thomas, which was discovered with the Nag Hammadi text, I believe, which says right in it, he who discovers the earth discovers it is a corpse, and he who discovers the earth discovers it is a body. And it is. All right, everything that I have found supports the oldest text, all the way back to the Sumerian. So I'm not just some Bible thumper guy. I want to know, how did it all start? Who's really in control? Is there an afterlife? How do you get the best deal coming out of this one? What should you do? How should you react? How should you treat other people? How should you be treated? What should you accept? What should you deny? What should you find repulsive? All right, these are the things I want to know. I want to know how to get to an existence which is after I die. I'm going to die, and I don't have all that much longer left, probably. I have no idea. I could live, who knows? But every day is a day closer to the day you're going to have to confront what's going to happen after you take that last breath. So I want to sort of think about it and put it in perspective, and that is precisely what I'm doing. And if you have any interest, you're certainly welcome to listen and to participate. Now, I am going to start another channel, I believe. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but it's going to be basically, I think I might even call it like both sides. Because now, we can talk about these things openly now. We don't have to hide. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to cower. We don't have to kowtow to anybody. Say, oh, look at these fools, these flat earthers, these this and that, and oh, these religious Bible-thumping morons. No. We show evidence that supports the things that were said in the Bible, and all that other text was pretty accurate. So now you, Mr. Future Scientist here, you tell us how you arrived at your decisions other than just to deny what exists and we can see. It's time to change the whole thing. So don't feel lower than anybody else, because nobody's had this information before. This is brand new stuff. So I don't want to make anybody feel bad. I don't want to make anybody feel overly good that, you know, wow, this is all 100%. Well, who knows what it is? But you look at what you see, and then you start to think. If you don't look at what you see, and immediately you start calling names, and it's exactly what they did to Velikovsky, identical. And the same thing happened to me. From day one, I was called a creationist, and who do I think I am, some giant human being, blah, blah, blah. And that was just between me and the top people at all the top institutions. And it ended up with police and lawyers and everything saying, leave these people alone. Because I couldn't be heard. Nobody would hear me. I was being shut out, being put on all spam lists, and told, you know, I know that there was a conspiracy against me. I'm almost certain of that. It's my opinion, because it was so widespread. Nobody would talk to me. And they still do today, zero. So, and I know the people, and I know the people that know the people that I know. And I know the people that know the people that know the people that I know that know the people that I know. And I know that. Because I've talked to those people in a extremely circuitous way most often, but it always gets back to the one that makes the statements that I wanted to interact with. And I'm sure they're hearing what I'm saying, because trust me, I'm not a quiet guy. And again, like I said, it didn't end well years ago, and they intimidated me. Yes, they did. I took the videos down, and I had to retreat, because I didn't have at that point the DNA and the CAT scans and the anatomists and all that. And after that I did. I got a little more aggressive. But it just never mattered. I just ignored it. So I guess that's enough whining to go. Here goes.
To Doubleday, which did not have a textbook division, Doubleday was quite happy to take it over. They made a lot of money. It continued to sell. And this is a story that everyone knows about because it was written in all the newspapers. Everybody said, guess what's happening? It was a big scandal. If you Google Harlow Shapley, they say quite openly that he led the campaign against Velikovsky. Now, you have to understand why Shapley personally was at war with Velikovsky. Harlow Shapley became a major astronomer at Harvard in the early 20s, but he had a very unhappy career because at the same time, alongside him, was Edwin Hubble. And Hubble turned out to be a far more important astronomer than Shapley. And the big battle between them, and it was a vicious battle, was about the size of the universe.
Hubble was wrong too. The universe is not expanding the way Hubble says, and that's because of the redshift. The redshift is light is slowing down. The most recent pictures of the universe show it's locked together virtually like atoms in electron flood theory. Almost identical. They overlap, the rings overlap, and they create elegant patterns. Virtually identical. And that's electron flood theory. It works.
Shapley wanted to keep everything neat and clean. What I mean by that is he wanted to describe the solar system as the entire universe. And he called it an island universe. And when somebody said, what about all these dim spots and so on? He said, these are merely gas and so on, they're not important. Whereas Hubble said, no, these things are individual galaxies on their own. They're way outside the solar system. And the universe is much larger than Shapley would allow. And Shapley and Hubble fought it out. And Hubble eventually won. And Shapley grudgingly had to concede that Hubble was right, although he never liked it, and he called Hubble's work junk science and so on. But that was a tremendous disappointment in Shapley's life. Now also, he had been a bit of a left-leaning communist before the war. He had wanted America and Russia, which had just become communist a decade or two before, to be friends. He wanted everyone to be friends, and this reminds me of when I was a little boy and I went out on the street to play. You remember those were the days when you could actually walk out and have friends on the street. Now, you have to have your father arrange a play date. He has to drive you 20 minutes away, and he has to organize it 3 weeks in advance so you have a play date with your friend. In those days, you just went out on the street and you played. Now, my mother used to tell me, make nice, nice. In other words, get along with the people, make nice, nice, you see? And Shapley wanted America and the Russians and so on to make nice, nice, but it didn't work out. And at the end of the war, another war started between America and Russia, and this left him very unhappy. Now, he also thought that America had the atomic bomb in 1945 or 46, and no one else had it. So America became like the public school principal. When little boys are fighting in the schoolyard at recess, the principal goes out and says, now stop. And they have to stop because he has the authority. And America had the bomb, and they were like the school principal that had the authority. But by 1948 or 49, the Russians had acquired the atomic bomb, so that didn't work out for Shapley. He was very disappointed. But Shapley had one, I don't know if it was a secret, one secret obsession, one cherished idea. And I found out about this because I went to McGill Library in Montreal, and I checked through 4 successive editions of the first-year primer on astronomy that was sold to Harvard students in Astronomy 101. And it went from the 30s, 40s, into the 50s. It was approved by Harlow Shapley, and there is a section there on the solar system, in which he argued that the solar system is the most precise organization of units in the world, in the universe, and that everything happens with absolute precision down to almost a portion of a second. So the one place in the universe that Shapley could cherish, because everything else was going to hell. On Earth, there had been the Second World War, there had been the rise of fascism, there had been atomic bombs, anger between different countries. He could not bring order on the world. He probably could not bring order in the distant areas of the universe because there were galaxies, and I don't know if he knew as early as 1950 that when galaxies collide, or when super galaxies collide, it is the largest form of violence in the universe. But at least he could say, it may be all hell down here, and it may be all hell way up there, but in between, there is this marvelous system of absolute unchanging serenity. It's been that way for 3.5 billion years. It will presumably continue for another 3.5 billion years. And this is the solar system. And Velikovsky comes along and says, no, 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 no. The solar system is violent. It has experienced major disruptions up until even minus 1500 and minus 700, which is 3,500 years ago. And so Shapley was being attacked in the last bastion of order that he could believe in. And
well, I just want to say something. I'm not going to go too much further with this, but Velikovsky was inside the academic arena, so he was being hurt. Now, he's coming in with new evidence outside of his psychiatric field, but it was obviously, it's true. And he knew, and he presented all this. I think I've shown all that about the temperatures and all of this business, and all the texts that were written. And it said when it was born, it was a fiery comet, a fiery star, or something like that. It was just like almost like the sun. It was that bright. And that's why he said it would still have to be a ton of temperature. But it also is spinning backwards. That is going to increase the temperature dramatically. Now, it's time to call into account the people that are teaching our kids. If they're not willing to learn themselves, how can we send the kids there and make the kids pay them? And I mean, this is really what's going on now. It's very tragic to see these kids having all of this debt, and then they're not getting the jobs they thought they were going to get. Now the COVID hit, so that's just really. And what about all the debt they have? All the things they learned. These colleges should have known already that they weren't right. I mean, at least for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been sending it. I literally sent out basically a demand that said, this is your fiduciary duty to look into this, to teach these kids the right things. And I have the evidence, and I need it seen, and not a single one of them would see it. So that's all I can say. Now, who's right, who's wrong, how it's handled after this, I can't tell you. But I see it as a real tragic situation. Exactly what happened to Velikovsky, exactly what happened to Tesla, exactly what happened to all of these people that brought forth their evidence. And then you got the principal who is the bully, and he crushes the kid. He intimidates him. And in the case of paying academia, they are extorting. Not only extorting the money to say, if you don't give us money, we won't give you a degree that says you're intelligent. They are also intimidating them to say, don't you argue or we will give you a bad grade, which will destroy you in life. So, and then they're racketeering by saying, if your stuff isn't peer reviewed, we're not going to let you see it. So they hold the reins of power, and the reins of power are enforced by extortion and intimidation and racketeering. And fiduciary failure because they're not acting in the best interests of students. I find that pretty damning evidence in a number of ways, but that's just me. These are all just my opinions, so I could be wrong. What do you think?